Welcome to Don't Ask That Question. I'm Kelly O'Mara, and today we're going to continue our conversation with Susan Lindauer. Susan was an American asset providing pre-war intelligence covering Iraq and Libya and warning of 9/11 long before the disastrous event. During our last show, Susan told us about her efforts to get information to the White House and Washington leaders. Today, we're going to pick up where we left off, and Susan's going to explain her arrest under the Patriot Act and her imprisonment without trial. So Susan, thank you for your dedication to the safety of the United States. And thank you for coming on my show so we can talk about your remarkable story.
I appreciate it. To sum up, my cousin was the chief of staff to George Bush, named Andrew Card. Andrew Card is the man who leaned in and whispered in George Bush's ear on the morning of 9/11, whispered that the 9/11 attack had just occurred. In point of fact, I personally had been warning about the 9/11 attack and had received intelligence about the 9/11 attack for 6 months prior.
So give me a date. Give me a date.
April of 2001, I was summoned to my CIA handler's office.
Who is?
Richard Fuse. And he informed me that he had a message that he wanted me to deliver to the Iraqi embassy in New York. I had been a long time intelligence asset for the CIA and defense intelligence agencies covering Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Egypt, Malaysia, on the question of terrorism. That was my job, was anti-terrorism, way before it became fashionable for anybody else to do it. And I dealt with real terrorists. I met Osama bin Laden in Paris. He had a bomb, the bomb exploded. And I barely escaped that with my life that time. So everything, he was a real terrorist. That is factually true. And there are certain parts of the government story that are right, that are accurate, but the missing component is that we absolutely expected this attack to occur. And that is something that you must understand. It was absolutely known as early as April of 2001. I was summoned to give a message to the Iraqis demanding they must hand over all intelligence involving airplane hijackings and a strike on the World Trade Center as a known target. And the first time I delivered the message, the Iraqis had been so cooperative for many years in my anti-terrorism work. I just asked them to send a cable to Baghdad. And they said, okay, sure, we'll do that. And then I went back to Washington, and my CIA handler said, what did they say when you threatened them? And I said, well, I didn't have to threaten them. He said, oh, I told you to threaten them. You go right back to New York and you deliver the message exactly as I tell it. And that is that this threat, they will be bombed more harshly than they've ever been bombed before. And that's hard to do if you've been bombing somebody like we'd been bombing Iraq. That we were going to do something worse and more violent and destructive than we'd ever done before was hard to communicate. But I said, you go back and you tell them that we're going to do this. And so I did. And the Iraqis responded, wow, we've already invited the FBI to send a terrorism task force into Baghdad. This was done after the bombing of the USS Cole. And we've already agreed that they should do this. So why don't you go back to Washington, tell them I will expedite any visas, and I will give instructions to the embassy staff here in New York that if the FBI show up and want to, that I should be any meeting that I'm in, it should be interrupted. I will rush right back to the embassy. I will process their visas as fast as possible. Well, I communicated that as of May of 2001. And the United States took no action at all. They're like, oh, well, but then again, they kept demanding it. So
can I ask you a question? So my curiosity is, so you're dealing with Iraq. I mean, obviously, all the pilots were Saudi. So how did that work?
Isn't that something? The Iraqis throughout the summer of 2001, I did not know that at this point. I did not know that they were all Saudis. I was just told repeatedly, stampede them. This is so important. This is so important. The Iraqis have got to give it to us. And so throughout the summer of 2001, while the Iraqis repeatedly said, send in the FBI, I was already negotiating the return of the weapons inspectors to Iraq with Iraq's ambassador. So my message was twofold. We must not allow this attack to occur. You've got to find anything there is about it and give it to me, because we don't want anything to derail the resuming the weapons inspections. Nothing should get in the way of the weapons inspections. And I was afraid the attack would distract from that, which it did. I was right. And so I told the Iraqis that if they were serious about the weapons inspections, they had to be serious about the 9/11 attack as well. And I was right on both counts. The Iraqis kept throwing up their hands saying, we're looking for it, but everything circles back to Washington. We're not finding anything in the Arab world at all.
Not even in Saudi Arabia?
No, no.
I mean, why would
they insisted they had no knowledge of it? That's what the message was repeatedly. We have no knowledge. You, Susan, are the source of this. You are the source of this. Everything originates with you, but we're not finding anything independent of me. Mm-hmm. And so that was the answer that I had, was that the Iraqis had nothing to contribute on the 9/11. They just did not know. And I was making it abundantly clear that I was worried that it would mess up the weapons inspections if this attack occurred. Right. So in August, on August, there's one more thing I need to say. On August 2nd was the date of the Robert Mueller's Senate nomination hearing. And my CIA handler and I had a conversation on August 2nd, very precisely. And he said to me, gosh, what happens if there is no FBI director when this attack occurs? And I said, God, do you think it's going to be that soon? He said, it's imminent. We know the attack is imminent. We are expecting mass casualties at any moment to go down. And what saved me in all of this was that I was telling, I had civilian friends who had family in Connecticut, and they traveled to New York frequently. And I repeatedly told him to stay, him and his family, to stay out of New York City. Mm-hmm. So there is private civilian testimony sworn under oath in the Southern District of New York before a federal judge, 1,000 feet from where the World Trade Center used to stand. And he swore under oath that he knew about the 9/11 warnings because I told him throughout the spring and summer of 2001, and that I was repeating what I was telling him about my connections, my conversations with the Iraqis over this whole point.
So let me ask you a question. So if Dr. Fuse, your CIA handler, is telling you, no, we know it's going to happen, it's imminent, it's there, did you ask him, how do you know that?
The CIA knew it.
Yeah, but did you get any specifics from him? Because he's sending you to the Iraqis who didn't have anything to do with it and knew nothing about it.
He told me the threat against Iraq, the very specific words that I was told to say. He said, and as an asset, if I'm acting as a back channel, I am required to deliver the message precisely as it is communicated, not to put my own interpretation or my own spin on it. Okay. It's not Susan Lindauer's foreign policy, it's George Bush's foreign policy. So I was told to say that the threat against Iraq originated at the highest level of government, specifically above the CIA director and above the Secretary of State. Okay. And those are only three people: the President, George Bush, Vice President Dick Cheney, and Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld. Those are the three people. But it was a very precise message. the threat originates above the CIA director and above the Secretary of State.
And yet, let me just jump in here because this is interesting to me. And yet, we know that the Saudis were responsible for it, the actual physical attack. But yet, the Saudis are very close to the Bush family. Okay. And yet they're telling you to tell the Iraqis. I don't know. I'm feeling like
no, they did. That's true.
This is a cover.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It was they obviously were they wanted a Pearl Harbor event, and they were putting they were and it was obviously Iraq had nothing to do with it, and had no advanced knowledge and no way of getting the advanced knowledge because it was all from the Saudi side.
Right.
It did not originate from Hezbollah or Iran or Syria or any of the other sources that Iraq would be trolling on
Osama bin Laden is Saudi.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So I'm looking at your CIA handler.
No, he knew they were doing this deliberately. They were setting up the Iraqis for an attack, and they were saying they wanted to be. It was a psyop in that respect. It was a psychological operation that they were they were setting up the Iraqis to be for the blame, no matter what happened. Nothing was going to get in the way of a war in Iraq.
Okay.
And so on August 2nd, that was the day of Robert Mueller's nomination. I can tell you there was a second team, because I actually came back I told this story, and well, I better tell the story first. Sorry. On August 2nd, we had this conversation about Robert Mueller. I was not at my house. I was at a consulting gig in Silver Spring, Maryland, at a very specific office. And I was having the conversation in that office with Richard Fuse. And he said, what'll happen if there's an attack and there's no attorney general, or no FBI director, excuse me. No FBI director at that moment. I said, God, do you think it's that soon? He said, yes. I said, I will go to New York on August 4th. In 2 days, I will run to New York and see the embassy one last time before the attack. And he said, Susan, that attack is imminent. I want you to tell them to give you any fragment of intelligence. And then after that visit to New York on Saturday, August 4th, I do not want you to go back to the embassy at all until after the attack is over. And I said, okay, and I'll see you in your office on Monday, August 6th. Okay, so I can, on the basis of the August 2nd hearing date, which is a known date, I can tell you the precise dates. And then on August 6th, I met Richard Hughes. I said, they don't know anything. They have nothing to give us. He said, they threw their hands up. They said, they don't know anything. They understand the consequences of not telling us. They get it, and they don't have anything. He said, okay. I said, well, but we have to do something more. Now, I had been given a phone number at the Attorney General John Ashcroft's office that I was only supposed to use in an emergency situation if I could not contact my CIA or Defense Intelligence handler regarding a terrorist attack. So if all my other channels were blown, I had one way, but I had never used it before. And I only used it for the 9/11 attack on August 7th or August 8th, which would be Tuesday or Wednesday. I contacted the office of Attorney General John Ashcroft. I was told that the person I was speaking to on the phone could lay eyeballs on the Attorney General from wherever they were sitting in the room. They could lay eyes on the Attorney General. And I said, my name is Susan Lindauer. I'm CIA Defense Intelligence. I cover Iraq and Libya. We have urgent information. We have urgent warnings about an imminent attack on the World Trade Center. I need an emergency broadcast alert across all federal agencies seeking any fragment of intelligence involving this imminent attack on the World Trade Center, involving airplane hijackings and or airplane bombings. This should be considered a code red. It is an emergency. Report back immediately. That whoever answered the phone said, okay, I'm going to give you a phone number at the Office of Counterterrorism. I want you to hang up the phone right now, call this number, give that message, give them this message you just gave to me, give it to this individual. They will deal with this immediately as a highest priority. I said, okay. So then I did that and I repeated it. My emergency broadcast alert was then sent out throughout the United States, and it ended up hitting the desk of Minneapolis FBI. The Minneapolis FBI, Colleen Rowley, who those of you who watched 9/11 know that Colleen Rowley and the Minneapolis FBI had arrested a man named Moussaoui, and he was the missing hijacker. He was later called the missing hijacker because he was taken into custody. And Colleen Rowley and the Minneapolis FBI, the most unlikely location. Moussaoui had been arrested trying to get into the United States. He had some weird information about all kinds of red flags were going off on him. They knew they had something. They requested permission to open his laptop and his phone and get a FISA warrant so they could examine his electronic devices. And Attorney General John Ashcroft refused. Attorney General John Ashcroft refused the request, even though it had come from my emergency broadcast alert. And he knew, the Attorney General's office was fully aware of the urgency and the concern. And I blame Ashcroft. May he burn in hell tonight. Bastard that he was, refused to let them do it.
Why do you think he did that?
Well, I think that I can tell you that on August 6th, the same day that I was having my conversation with my CIA handler, at the very same moment, Richard Clarke was having a conversation with George Bush in Crawford, Texas. And Crawford, he said, and George Bush said, oh, yeah, everybody keeps talking about this attack on New York and this, this airplane hijacking scheme involving the World Trade Center. He said, yeah, you've covered your ass. Now let's go play golf. You've done what you've said the message that you're supposed to say. Let's go play golf. Yeah, okay. And that was George Bush's reaction 1 month prior to the attack. Now, in my personal opinion, John Ashcroft and George Bush both had the opportunity and the knowledge, the foreknowledge to stop the attack. At that point, it was pretty easy to do. We could have done it. The Iraqis did not possess any intelligence on this at all. None, zero, want to be clear, zero. I can testify to that personally. But also I can testify that I was screaming my head off and everybody was screaming their heads off. Richard Clarke was warning George Bush about it. And there's just a flat out dissonance, cognitive dissonance, pretending that we did not know about this attack, because obviously we did. Obviously we knew it was coming.
So you're saying that the President of the United States at the time allowed the attack on 9/11. For what reason? For what reason?
I think that, well, he wanted the war in Iraq. I think that they did not understand the emotional trauma that would strike the United States. And the devastation of the images. I don't think they understood what they were going to do at all. Just like George Bush failed to comprehend, failed to grasp the devastation from the Iraq War.
So when he was in the room, in the
mistake of the Iraq War, the catastrophic mistake of the Iraq War.
So when he was in that classroom reading to the kids, and Andrew Card, your second cousin, came in and whispered to him that the towers had been hit. So basically, he already knew that. He already knew it. He knew it weeks ahead of time that it was going to happen.
Yes. He knew weeks ahead of time it was going to happen. Yes. And he knew months ahead of time. I was told in April and May of 2001 to threaten the Iraqis that we would bomb them back to the Stone Ages, quote, more harshly, viciously, savagely than they'd ever been struck before if they did not provide that intelligence to us. And they did not have it. And then the Iraqis responded very importantly by inviting the FBI to enter Baghdad and investigate the 9/11, the pre 9/11 events, saying, you know, if you think there's an attack, we'll expedite their visas and they can come in and find it,
So
because
I
the
have another,
Iraqis were totally committed to the weapons inspections and the larger protocols, the comprehensive peace framework that was amazing. We did a fantastic job. I did. I was the one who did it. The Iraqis also offered the United States preferential contracts on oil, pipeline reconstruction, pumping stations, all oil leasing and development rights. The United States would have preferential contracts for healthcare, hospital equipment, pharmaceuticals, preferential contracts for telecommunications and satellites, which is a big ka-ching for the United States. They offered to purchase 1 million automobiles, US manufactured automobiles, every year for 20 years.
let me ask you a question. So knowing what we know now, right, decades later, when 9/11 happened, did you have a conversation with Dr. Fuse, your CIA handler, and go, hey, how did you miss the Saudis?
Well, here's what happened. On the morning, oh yes, we had all kinds of conversations. On the morning of 9/11, the first airplane had struck the towers, and we were yelling at we were talking on the phone. It was before the tower came down, before the tower crashed down. So the airplanes had struck the towers, and now the people were going back into the building. And we kept saying, no, don't do it. It's gonna come down. It's gonna crash. It's gonna explode. Because we knew there were explosives in the building that were the whole time. The 9/11 attack always included bombs that would destroy the towers. Now, how we got in our heads that the bombs would be carried by the airplanes and would enter the building and destroy the towers. That's kind of what we were thinking. But we always knew that it involved airplane hijackings and bombs that would destroy the tower. So when we saw this, we were screaming at our TV screens, don't go back in the room, don't go back in there, don't go back upstairs, stay out of the building. Oh my God, tell them to stay out of the building. They shouldn't go back, it's so dangerous. And Richard blurted something out to me. He said, Susan, how many times do you see a video of a video footage of a car accident where the video is, the camera is totally still, and it captures the movement of the whole sequence of events of the car accident without moving, without jumbling its arms at all, without jumbling the screen at all. He said it never happens. And then he blurted something. He said, that video. And I was like, video? I was like, what? That video was shot by the Israelis. And they were waiting there to take that video. And that's why the camera is steady and not moving around, no whiplash. And I said, what did you just say? You just said to me that there's a video, that the Israelis took a video of this airplane striking the World Trade Center, and I've been looking for this goddamn attack. I was furious. I was very upset. And I was like, I've been looking for this for months, and you mean the Israelis have known about it the entire time and nobody told us? And now they're down there with their camera and they videotaped the whole thing, and they knew in advance it was going to happen. He said, and the phone went dead. He hung up the phone on me. And I called him back and he said, Susan, we must never discuss that again. We must never talk. And I said, but, and he said, no, we must never discuss that again. So how did the Israelis know? Now I'll tell you another thing that.
Well, how did he know that the Israelis knew?
Very good question. if you listen to the original recordings, which are before the doctoring of President Bush's response to 9/11, he says that before he went into the classroom, he watched a video of the first pilot.
Yes, I remember it.
Flying into the Trade Center.
Yes.
And he watched the video before he went into the classroom.
Right.
Now, if that was, now this would have to be a simulcast event.
Right. Yeah.
Because if it's just me, like if it's you or me on the street, on a street corner in New York, and we see this, as Richard said, our hands are going to be whipping around. Mm-hmm. And this is very steady video.
Right.
Flying over. And immediately it was, as they were recording it, it was being broadcast down in Florida in front of a live feed to George Bush.
Right.
And that is a devastating admission that they were all set up with their cameras ready and the feeds all ready to receive and transmit at the same time.
Right.
Otherwise, if it was me and I had it or you had it, we couldn't get it in front of George Bush in 5 minutes before he goes.
He knew it was going to happen. You just told me that he knew it was going to happen, and he did nothing.
Yes, correct.
So
correct.
I'm not surprised. And
he admits the whole thing. The whole thing is caught. So for those people who want to say, no, our president could never do such a thing, listen to his own words. He saw the video before he went into the classroom, and he said, my gosh, that's a really lousy pilot, because I used to fly airplanes and I knew how to fly an airplane. And that's it.
But then you had the act. But then you had the act in the classroom.
Yeah, the whole thing.
Your cousin participated in.
Yeah. It's the kind of thing that is so despicable. It is so despicable that Americans were so shocked and horrified that even when you confront them with the facts and truth,
right,
not want to believe it.
Right.
It is too much for the soul.
It's too evil. It's too evil.
It's too evil.
It is. It's too evil for regular Americans to grasp that kind of evil.
Yeah.
And I think they count on that, really, frankly.
Yeah.
But clearly that's what it is. So what happened next after that?
Well, what happened next was, this is, as you know, 18 months. So then we go into the Iraq War. Then we go through the whole bit about Iraq, George Bush trying to stampede the world into war. And it was one of the greatest acts of democracy, worldwide democracy. Billions of people would go out on the streets and demonstrate against the war in the run-up, in the weeks and months before the war. Everybody was watching Iraq comply with the weapons inspections, which I had negotiated. It's important for everybody to remember, because what happens to me next, I am the one who negotiated those weapons inspections, went off beautifully, flawless, no problems. And the whole world went out and demanded peace. And it was one of the greatest triumphs of democracy that our world has ever seen. And probably one of the last great stands of true populist democracy, when the world population said no to war in Iraq. Now, I was the asset who was, at that moment, the comprehensive peace framework, right up until the day of the invasion of Iraq, the comprehensive peace framework, Iraq would have gratefully, joyfully implemented it. And I took my papers of the comprehensive peace framework to Colin Powell, who was the next door neighbor of my CIA handler, Richard Hughes. So I took these papers directly to his house. I put them in I knocked on his door, rang the doorbell. His wife, Alma Powell, answered the door. I handed her this. I turned around and there was like a dozen Secret Service agents behind me. And they said, who are you? And I said, I'm Susan Lindauer. I'm the CIA and Defense Intelligence asset who's negotiated a possible settlement to this war. And I handed it to her and she handed it to the Secret Service. It is stamped, delivered to State Department, X-rayed. So we know that the papers were taken to the State Department. They were X-rayed. They were reviewed by Colin Powell. Absolutely, he saw them. And Colin Powell proceeded to lie to the entire world about
the United Nations.
At the United Nations. I warned him personally that the Iraqi exiles were falsifying intelligence on phony, non-existent weapons of mass destruction, and that Iraq had been trying for 2 years to get weapons inspectors back into the country. Since the final days of the Clinton White House. And I said, based on their performance and activities, they were ready to start these inspections at any time. And I think that it's very unlikely that they have weapons of mass destruction.
Okay, so despite having information, he went ahead.
Colin Powell turned it over to the FBI and said, shut her up. Shut her up. I don't want anybody hearing about this. It's going to embarrass my reputation. But then when Colin Powell wanted to lie to the public, I had to be removed, physically, literally removed. And at that point, I, unbeknownst, while they're doing their game and their lies and their deception on 9/11 in Iraq, I was anti-war, and I was in the demonstrations. I was participating. I was protesting the war and lobbying on Capitol Hill against the war, just like any other citizen. And I categorically deny that I was doing that on behalf of the Iraqi government. I was a lifelong anti-war activist. They had always known, the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency always were informed that I would always oppose war in Iraq and that I would help them, but I would help them in the anti-terrorism is what I was doing all through my career. I was doing anti-terrorism because I'm opposed to violence and I would help them with that, but I reserved the right always to oppose any military action against Iraq.
Let me ask you a question. So when you went to Colin Powell's house and handed these documents over, which was, excuse me?
Twice.
Okay. At the request of your handler, Dr. Fuse, the CIA, okay? Do you not think he knew that already? Do you not think that your handler was setting you up?
I was trying to stop the war. I say.
No, think about it, Susan. Think about it. He had to look. You're telling me the president of the United States knew, the chief of staff knew.
Andrew Card and Colin Powell both received my papers on the same days. Like I would drop it off with Andrew Card, then I'd drop it off with Colin Powell. So I knew, I had total confidence that the chief of staff to George Bush was fully informed about my work, my direct contacts with the Iraqis, negotiating the return of the weapons inspectors, and the comprehensive peace framework, including the invitation to the FBI to send a terrorism task force into Baghdad, and all sorts of economic advantages to peace.
Yeah, I got all that, Susan. I don't want to go through it again. What I'm asking you is very specific, okay? Dr. Fuse is having you give these people these documents. Is that right?
No, I was doing it on my own.
No, you said, no. Earlier you said Dr. Fuse told you to give those documents to Colin Powell.
He did not to Colin Powell. I did that on my own. I gave it to Andrew Card. I was already giving it to Andrew Card.
Did he know you were doing it?
Yes.
So your CIA handler knew you were giving all this information to both these people?
Absolutely, yes. Yes.
Okay. And you don't find it odd that then you would be the scapegoat?
Oh, well, it's not a question of being odd or not. It is a dirty, despicable thing that everybody knew. Everybody knew that I was an asset. Everybody knew that what was going on, and they were all playing this game of when the war started to go badly, the government became desperate to shift blame onto the shoulder for the war and the bad decision to go to war. They wanted to blame the intelligence community, and that was me. So they had this problem because the lie was that Congress, and it was Republicans and Democrats. It was Joe Biden and Lindsey Graham and George Bush. They were all in this together. Hillary Clinton, Chuck Schumer were just as guilty as Andrew Card and George Bush. But the elite, the power elite, wanted their war. They failed. It's like 9/11. George Bush failed to comprehend the devastation and the psychological trauma to the nation of the 9/11 attack.
Or he just didn't care.
He just didn't get exactly. But they failed. They didn't. They're sociopaths. They're amoral, hateful, malicious people.
So what happens then? So when do you?
So then because of what I had done, when they decided, but now the voters were so irate. The voters were demanding that these idiots who had done this war needed to be removed from power. And 6 months before George Bush's reelection campaign, the November elections, in March of 2004, George Bush was forced by circumstances to announce that he was appointing a blue ribbon commission, presidential commission, to investigate pre-war intelligence. I contacted that commission, said, I'm the one who did it. I want to testify. I want to tell all of you what really happened with Iraq and 9/11. And within 30 days of my calling, Senate Majority Leader Trent Lott and Senator John McCain. John McCain was running the commission. And I said, I want to testify. Within 30 days later, I woke to hear pounding on my door at 9 o'clock in the morning, or 8 o'clock in the morning. And it was the FBI with a warrant for my arrest. And they accused me of being an Iraqi agent and not a spy, because I was not spying. They accused me of lobbying for the Iraqi government. And I said, I'm lobbying against the war because I think the war is a disastrous stupidity. And this was avoidable and unnecessary. You never had to fire a single missile to achieve every goal that you had. Well, now they were scared because when I was first arrested, my CIA and defense intelligence handlers said, holy shit, what have you done? They were not debriefed. The intelligence agencies, the CIA and the defense intelligence agencies, were not debriefed that this was going to happen. And so now the politicians had stampeded, get her out of the way, arrest her, throw her in jail, stop her from talking. And now the Defense Intelligence Agency is like, you do know that everything that she said and did with 9/11 would have stopped this whole disaster. So you cannot shift the blame for the war onto the intelligence community while you're allowing Susan Lindauer to say she was an asset, which I was. And otherwise, you've just opened the Pandora's box where the world is going to hear this. You've just made the biggest mistake you could make, because it's a Pandora's box that's exploding at exactly the moment that we're losing the war. I mean, we're seriously losing the war at this moment. The other thing that I had done that really angered them was I protested Abu Ghraib. Within 60 days of the invasion, it wasn't even a year later, it was 60 days later, I had heard about the sexual abuse of Iraqi prisoners and photography. And I had gotten hold of some of the photography, and I gave it of the naked Iraqi prisoners, and I sent it to the United Nations Security Council, and I said, these are war crimes, and if your nations are supporting these atrocities against Iraqi prisoners, then this violates the Geneva Conventions of War. You are going to trigger a vastly more severe blowback against your occupation, than you can possibly imagine. You got to stop this right now. Cut it off, make them stop doing it. And that's when the FBI sent an agent to meet me, apparently, because they were not because I was breaking the law, but because I was telling them to stop, to cut the crap with this Abu Ghraib stuff. And which was a lot more wide. It was at Camp Cropper too. It was all over. The British were doing it, the US was doing it, and it was at a number of prisons. It appeared to be a policy of sexually degradation of the Iraqi male. Yeah. Right. So I was the good guy who opposed that. And no good deed goes unpunished.
So then they arrest you.
They arrest me on bogus charges. When I was first arrested, I was furious. I was yelling at the guards. And then I looked at the indictment. I was like, oh, this is stupid. And I figured out immediately 3 things. One, the diplomat had a girl, my Iraqi diplomat contact had a girlfriend named Susan. And it was very clear. I could see that by the clusters of the dates that he was having meetings with her, not with me. I was like, oh, okay, that's one defense. 2, it would later turn out that the Iraqi exiled had tried to stretch the evidence against me. So they forged a couple of documents, receipts in the value of $100. I'm not making this up. $100 and $150. Just 2. But the diplomat's name was wrong, and he had left the United States 10 months before he allegedly gave me the $100. He was not in the United States at all. And
Let me ask you a question. So you're in jail.
But I did not do it.
Wait, we're not getting there yet. You're in jail in Baltimore?
Yes.
And did your CIA handler, Dr. Hughes, or Paul Hoban, your DIA handler, come to your rescue?
Not a chance in hell. They totally they threw me under the train.
They did.
It's not even a bus at this point. It's a train track, and they threw me off the cliff into the abyss. They were such cowards and liars. They did not, but also I will tell you that ironically, the Defense Intelligence Agency itself did come to my rescue. My boyfriend was named Jay Fields at the time was Jay Fields, and they gave him a job at the Pentagon with a top secret security clearance and a salary just under 6 figures. So he was earning like $96,000 a year in Washington, D.C. But he was able to work at the Pentagon, and they were sending messages home through him to me, telling me what they wanted. They kept saying, Susan, they kept apologizing. I received, they repeatedly apologized. They said, the White House is forcing us to do this to you. We know it's wrong. And I was like sending them messages through him, said, explain. The diplomat had a girlfriend named Susan. I told you, because I had been reporting every single detail of my interactions with the Iraqis for years. And so I said, so I was debriefing him, and he would take the message into the Pentagon. And I was like, okay, tell them this is Susan. This is the other Susan. And I was like, I can show that I was not in New York on, there are 10 days, and 8 of those days I was not in New York. And also I was working at a job that had a time stamp clock. So you'd clock in the morning, and then you'd clock out for lunch. You clock in after lunch, and you clock out at the end of the day. And so there were 4 times a day that I was there, recording my presence. And it was, I live in Maryland, and this was in Washington, D.C., and, the embassy is up in New York City. So it would be impossible for me to be there. I could prove it. We had an explanation, because it was the girlfriend of the diplomat named Susan. and the amounts of money were very small. 3 lunches totaled $92.92.
So
And
let me
there
ask
was
you a question.
a bottle of perfume for $65. That's $150.
So let me ask you a question, Susan. So you're initially arrested and charged with acting as a foreign agent under the Patriot Act.
Not
Um,
a spy.
Not a spy. And are you released at that point or do you have to post bail?
I posted a $500,000 bail, and my case was moved up to the court of Judge Michael Mukasey, who was at that time the Chief Justice for the Southern District of New York and one of the most brilliant jurists, thank God, thank God, thank God, in the country. And he could see what they were doing. I was terrified. I mean, I will tell you, it's a scary thing to be accused of stuff like this and then to be in front of a judge like that. Fierce legal mind, just extraordinary depth. When
were you sent to Carswell?
They once very quickly they discovered that we blew apart the charges. Okay. And they but then they were left with the fact that I was a CIA asset, defense intelligence asset, and the military was losing the war and it was getting worse and worse by the hour. It was devastating losses. And the military soldiers were in what they call stop loss, which meant they could not retire, leave the military. They were forced to go back, even when their tours was up, they were forced to go back and re-enlist again and again and again. And pretty much the United States was not going to get out of that war until we won it, or until the president of the United States declared us defeated. And they were stuck. And so at that point,
so that was Desert Shield.
The Pentagon is sending messages home to me. Susan, they were giving me instructions saying, Susan, you must not tell the civilians what happened. It is paramount. Remember that as you're a spy for the United States, and you are being treated you have to treat the US side as if they were the Iraqis and you've been captured by an enemy force. They said, under no circumstances are you to disclose who, how, what, when, where. Write your book after the war. But right now, it is critical that you stay silent. And we're gonna protect you. And for 18 months, they did. From March of 2004 until September 2005, at their demand, I stayed silent, but they did not bother me. Nobody called me to court at all. I was just completely shut out of the court. Nothing happened. And then in September 2005, that jerk Colin Powell, on September 8th, Colin Powell gave an interview with Barbara Walters, declaring that no mid-level intelligence people had warned him that the Iraqi exiles were falsifying reports on intelligence. That was September 8th. 9 days later, on September 17th, the Justice Department rubber stamped that I was not competent to stand trial. Okay, I negotiated the return of the weapons inspectors to Iraq, but I'm not competent to stand trial. Okay, that's September 17th. On September 23rd, which is 15 days after this atrocious broadcast with Barbara Walters on 2020, I am hauled into court and ambushed. And it's the first time I've been in court since March of 2004. And it's now September 23rd, 2005. And I'm going, we thought we were told by my attorney, the judge just wanted to know what was going on with the case. Are they going to do something or not? Can we drop these charges against this woman? So I'm going into court thinking they're probably going to drop the charges. And my uncle Ted was an attorney. He says, Susan, I'm coming into New York. I don't trust these people at all. I want them to see that you have family who are standing with you. So he was there with me. And they pulled out a psych report that was totally garbage. And my uncle my uncle, fantastic attorney, could turn on a dime and fight in a poison brief situation. Boom! He was so good. He said, Susan, fire your attorney immediately, and I will tell the judge that I'm going to represent you today and that we are going to get you a new attorney. And this is if you go and he said, if you go into Carswell prison where they want you to go, you will never come out. This is so bad. He was looking at it. He was like, oh my God, it's so bad that you will never get out of prison at all. And so my attorney, who was a public defender, stood up and he said, excuse me for one moment. And he went in to the judge and he said, Susan's uncle is an attorney. He's going to fire me on the spot and take over this case. And Judge Mukasey, this is one bad decision that he made. This is the one bad decision he made. He said, no, she is not going to fire you. If Susan Lindauer fires you today, I will revoke her bail immediately and she will go into custody right now, this hour, and she will not get out of prison until after the case is over. She must submit to a forensic psychiatric examination at Carswell Prison. She will be incarcerated for no longer than 4 months. It could be sooner. She could be released sooner than that. If they say that she can go home, that's another matter. But she's going in, and I insist that she do this. And I have been very lenient on this case. And this is what we're going to do. She's going to have this damn psychiatric evaluation. And he said, Ms. Lindauer, I want to reassure you that I have, as a jurist, I do not automatically ever believe what a psychiatrist says in my courtroom. However, this case must be adjudicated. We have to deal with this. It's time. We're going to do this. So you have to go in. And I said, and my uncle, who was an attorney, very capable, University of Chicago Law School, very capable, stood up and said, Ms. Lindauer would like you to know that she wants to have a hearing. And the judge said, we will absolutely recognize Ms. Lindauer's right to a hearing after the forensic psychiatric evaluation is done inside prison. She can have a hearing after she gets out of prison. I was like, oh, great.
So you go down to Carswell.
So then I go down to I was given 10 days to get my affairs in order, which is very difficult. Mostly if you're going to prison in advance, you get advance warning. They give you like 6 weeks. But Colin Powell, you understand, was going out on his book tour. He had decided that he was going to rewrite the history books and pretend that he was the victim of bad intelligence, and it was those at the fault of those intelligence assets, and George Bush was not to blame for 9/11. Dick Cheney was not to blame for Iraq. Nobody did this except that bad intelligence asset. And how the hell was I going to defend myself when I was locked up in prison? And anybody checking the record would say, oh, she's been accused of incompetence. She's not competent. Well, our government could never be so, people actually blame me for the war in Iraq. So then I had this triple force attack that the people that the civilian psychiatrists were like, it's your fault there was this war. You did this to our soldiers. It's you. And I could watch late night television on prison television and see, irate comedians tearing apart the intelligence community, put those people in jail. And that's where I was. So George Bush was like, she did it. Look what she did. I was victimized. I'm a victim because she didn't tell me What a lot. I mean, this is like the most obscene cowardice.
Okay, so
Say how bad this is. It was obscene cowardice.
sure. So eventually, what happens in Carswell is they want you.
Well, it gets even worse because um, huh, they treated me like an enemy non-combatant for a while. I was denied three. I was denied attorney visits. My uncle, who was trying desperately to save me, a family member and attorney, he showed up at the military base and said, I'm here to see, you're required to say who you're going to see. I want to go into Carswell prison. I want to see this prisoner, Susan Lindauer. And the guard at the gate said, nope, no, you're not. There is no, first he was told there is no prison on this military base. There is no prison. There is no inmate named Susan Lindauer here. You are not coming onto my base. And my uncle, who was an attorney, had all his legal credentials. He had already submitted them to the prison. He did everything you're supposed to do. He was, again, he's an attorney. He knows how to do this. He did everything you're required to do. But he also had the order from the prison, from the judge saying, yes, send Susan Lindauer here. And he gave the guard and he said, look at the papers. There is an inmate named Susan Lindauer here. I need to see her. Here's my attorney badges, et cetera, et cetera. And the judge and the guard was like, nope, you are not coming onto this military base to see that prisoner. And meanwhile, other inmates were getting visitors all day long. And so they fought about it. And then the second time he came, he drove 700 miles in each direction by car to see me and came in. And sure enough, the second time they said, oh, there's a prison here, but there's no visiting hours today. You are not going to see that prisoner. That Susan Lindauer is not getting a visitor from an attorney. The third time it happened, Judge Michael Mukasey was standing by in his courtroom, and he had to order U.S. Marshals to flank my uncle/attorney, who by this time was, again, acting as co-counsel on my case. He had actually submitted a friend, like at my request, and the judge understood at this point that everything was going wrong. And the U.S. Marshals flanked him, and the judge spoke to the guard, and he said, this is now a constitutional crisis. You have an American citizen locked up in prison. She has the right to see an attorney. I am the judge in this case, and as Chief Justice Michael Mukasey, who would later become United States Attorney General Michael Mukasey, same man. And he said, I am ordering you to avoid a constitutional crisis that you are required under the Constitution to let this woman this man enter this base for an attorney visit. And I am ordering the prison to open up the visitor center just for her. And at this point, Judge Mukasey knew that this had gone terribly wrong. But you also have to see it from the standpoint of the military. The Defense Intelligence Agency was protecting the soldiers. Now, as a longtime asset, I'm supposed to understand this stuff. Okay, this is my playground. This is my sandbox. Okay, I know how they're gonna. When they say in the James Bond movies, where they say if you are caught, we will disavow all knowledge of you. We will deny any knowledge of your operation. You are standing alone. This is what it means. Now, in my case, it was so intense that the Defense Intelligence Agency behind the scenes was continuing to beg me, do not tell these civilians what you were doing, please, because they were, and there was good reason. We had a dialogue going on. Defense Intelligence and I had a dialogue going on.
Wait a minute. So DIA could talk to you, but your attorney couldn't?
Through my boyfriend, Jay Fields. And I was like, they're like, look, we've got to be worried about the welfare of the soldiers. We've got to worry about the Iraqi citizens' reaction to the occupation. We've got to worry about the recruitment of new soldiers, US soldiers, and we've got to worry about the enemy's ability to manipulate my intelligence and what I'm telling you about, like this peace framework and the knowledge of 9/11. And that would be, they were terrified, and with good reason, that that would be a magnet for foreign fighters to rush into Iraq, and it would be a feeding frenzy to kill off these American soldiers. It was already bad enough.
Okay.
They had known all of the facts.
Stop.
Oh,
Okay. So you're getting information through your boyfriend, through DIA, but your own attorney can't have any contact with you.
I had two attorneys. I had one attorney who, my primary court appointed attorney was a public defender, and he threw me under the bus. He threw me onto the train track.
No, you're missing my point here. You're in Carswell.
Yeah.
Okay. Who's your attorney at that point?
I have two attorneys.
Okay. Were you speaking with that attorney?
Oh, yes.
But you weren't speaking with your uncle.
I was speaking with both of them.
No, you just told me that you had to get the
I was speaking with both of them. I have two attorneys at this point.
Let me finish. You just told me that you had to get Judge Mukasey to make them allow your uncle to come in and see you.
Yes. Yes, fact.
So you weren't speaking with them both over time. It took a lot of effort to get your uncle to be able to speak to you.
Well, we had prison phone conversations. We had prison phone conversations with both my public defender, who persisted in denying that I was an asset.
Okay.
So it was like this. We had two attorneys.
Right. So you were speaking. You were always speaking to your attorneys.
Yes.
You just didn't get to see your uncle.
I did not get an attorney visit, which is where you talk strategy. You don't talk strategy on prison phone calls that last 5 minutes. Okay.
All right. So,
yeah. And also, yeah. So we needed to have attorney meetings where we could plan out how to fix this devastating mess.
So the next thing that comes up is they want to drug you.
Yeah. Yes, they were ordered under the law. When I was first sent in, they said that they could only hold me for a maximum of 160 days. That's 4 months, because I was nonviolent. I was not threatening myself or my neighbors or friends, and I was not destructive of property. So as long as you meet those criteria that you're not violent, the maximum they can hold you is 4 months. But then they decided they would have to release me. And I was promised a release date of February 1st. But what happened was that exactly at that moment, the war was getting worse and worse and worse. And Colin Powell was out on the campaign trail telling everybody, like he loved his lie. He was selling that lie, and he wanted to make sure that I could not get out of prison and tell anybody the truth. And I was free. I was home free without, they would have dropped the charges, except that Colin Powell was playing that lying, dishonest, corrupt game of his.
Okay, so again,
they didn't want to let me go. And now they had a problem because, the time was up. So how would they justify holding me? Then they came up with a horrific proposal that I should be forcibly drugged with Haldol, Ativan, and Prozac, lobotomized, chemically lobotomized, so that I could be, until whatever point, I could be cured of saying that I had been an intelligence asset, which was factually true. I would never say that I was an intelligence asset. I would never say that I gave advance warning about 9/11, or that I negotiated the return of the weapons inspectors to Iraq. And I would agree that I must be guilty, and that they would know that I was cured of my mental defect when I stopped saying I was an asset, Stop declaring that I warned about 9/11.
Right, okay, we got that.
Yeah, there you go.
So you said no.
I said, fuck you, go to hell. Sorry. Is that like against the law on your show?
We'll see what they say. But let's not keep it
But
up.
I said,
So,
I said, criminal lie. I said, that's felony perjury. You know, I did this. I'm ready to go into court. And I kept saying I wanted a hearing. I said, I demand a hearing. You have sent me here without a hearing. I demand, if you don't believe I'm telling you the truth, don't take my word for it. I have witnesses and evidence that will show it's true. I said, prove this very easily. And I said, I'm ready any day to have a hearing. And I kept demanding it because they were like, well, we have to cure you of these things, you know. And the other thing that was really scary was that I would only be cured if I would agree that I was guilty of the charges.
mm-hmm.
And if I would not say that, because if I would agree that I was guilty of the charges,
Mm-hmm.
then I would automatically be considered competent to make that guilty plea. And so they were literally, they did everything possible, which was just, you know, they were denying.
So when did you get word that you were going to have a hearing in New York?
I was told, now I was still in prison, mm-hmm. but at this point I was begging for a hearing, and Judge Mukasey was aware now because of the refusal to let me see have attorney visits, mm-hmm. which are very important, not phone calls, visits, mm-hmm. talking strategy,
right,
working it out.
Got it.
Now Mukasey was aware that this was really a problem. This was going so wrong. This was not what anybody had told him when the whole thing started. And I was fighting for my life. And I was summoned. He said, okay, we'll have a hearing on forcible drugging. We're going to get her out of Carswell. We're going to get Susan out of Carswell. And we're going to bring her to New York. And we're going to have and we're going to have a hearing on whether or not she should be drugged. Mm-hmm. And I think my uncle believed that at that point, Judge Mukasey had already decided that he was not going to drug me. Mm-hmm. But he was getting me out of Carswell, and they took me to MCC, the Metropolitan Correctional Center, and in Manhattan on Pearl Street. And I was held there for 4 more months, from May until September, 5 months. And literally I was released the last day that Mukasey was on the bench. But during that whole time, I kept sending him letters saying, I do not, you know, I kept saying, I am asking you for a real hearing. You've declared me not competent to stand trial without a hearing. I want a hearing. My rights require a hearing. I'm entitled to one. I'm ready to prove everything I say. And I said, look, if you want to have a closed door hearing, you have my defense intelligence handler come in, and he'll be forced to tell you the truth, which is that we've been working together for years. And at that point, Paul was terrified. Everybody was terrified. And what happens in intelligence, and if you're in the intelligence world, you know this. This is not a surprise when it happens. They tell you that you'll be disavowed, but they go into something called fail-safe. And that means that everybody who you're working with deny you. Okay, it's fail-safe. They deny your existence.
Okay.
So that's what I started to go through. And then that was even more terrifying because every day I was worried about this decision coming down that was going to chemically lobotomize me, mm-hmm. until whatever time I would agree that I was just guilty of the charges. And they wanted to detain me for up to 10 years.
Right.
Forcible drugging for 10 years with no right to a hearing to prove I was telling the truth. And that was just the most god-awful, horrifying thing that, you know, I didn't give them a guilty plea. I was demanding a trial, and they did not have evidence, and they knew it.
Okay, so let's move on. I'm on a schedule here, Susan. I know you have a lot to discuss, but so you do get your hearing.
For forcible drugging. But I did not get my, but then, but I was not given a hearing on the integrity of my claims until a year and a half after my release from prison. But I was really, but on the day, I was so frightened at this point. I mean, honestly, I was terrified. When I was locked up at MCC and Carswell, I became absolutely terrified out of my mind, scared like a scalded cat. And I was like, you know, I was scared beyond, I was like pissing my pants. I was so frightened. I was terrified, absolutely, terrified. Everyone was terrified for me. And when I kept asking, I would go into the guard's office and I would say, do they have any message from the judge? Is there any message from my attorney? And they were like, no. They knew. They were like, they tried to calm me down. I'd like to say that there were some good people at MCC who understood that something really frightening was happening. They did not know. They tried to, when I first was transferred to MCC, Carswell urged them to put me in solitary confinement. And I literally promised, got down on my knees and begged them. I said, don't put me in solitary confinement. I will never discuss my case with any of your people, because they were scared. I would say to the staff that I knew about the 9/11 warnings and all this stuff about it would be leaked out to the press, and it would be terrifying that they would get in trouble. So I had to agree that I would not disclose any details of my case. And but on the day of that the news came, I was in the shower, and they dragged my fellow inmates came, and they pounded on the shower door and said, Susan, come at once. Your case is decided. And I was soaking wet, and I threw on my clothes, and I was just drenched. I couldn't even towel off, just threw on my clothes, soaking wet, and ran downstairs. The guards took me in, and my public defender, that one, the bad one, the bad attorney, was there. And he said, and he looked at me, and he said, and he was shaking. And I looked at it, he said, Susan, you won. And I literally collapsed on the floor. I crashed. I dropped to the floor. I was like, oh God. And I just crashed down onto the floor, and the guards had to come and pull me up again. And I said, and I was just shaking. He said, I won. And he said, you won. He said, I've already called Jay Fields, and he's driving up. You're going to have a hearing tomorrow morning, and you will be released tomorrow morning. And at this time, it was like, 6 or 7 at night. And literally, we had known that tomorrow would be Judge Mukasey's last day. And so he, at that point, if he did not release me before his last day, I would be held over forever. So, I mean, it was really scary, because it's like, we're counting the hours, and he's going to leave office. And what are we, he's about to retire from the bench. And if they don't call me in, I'm totally fucked. I mean, I'm somebody who hates drugs. There are people in this world who think drugs are really cool. I am not one of them. I love.
Okay, so he's, look, I'm running out of time. I want to get to the end of this, and
you.
So wait, so now the next thing is you're released. You go back to Maryland.
And the first thing I do is I go to the Sarah McClendon group, and I give a talk at the National Press Club like a week after my release. And there's this wonderful lady named Kelly O'Mara who's there. That would be you. And you came, and so did the Chief of Staff and Legislative Director for Congressman John Conyers, and the Director of the Naval Affairs Office, and a whole bunch, and someone from the ACLU, the head of the Washington, D.C. ACLU office. And everybody wanted to hear what the heck happened in my case. How did this thing go wrong? So
Okay.
and it was at that moment that my beloved attorney, Brian Shaughnessy, who would take over my case, he was also there. And he said, I'm going to take your case. This Patriot Act, everybody was concerned because the Patriot Act involved secret charges, secret evidence, secret, I was never allowed to know who had accused me of what crime. They were allowed to hide the evidence. My attorney was not allowed to. They said, oh, we have evidence, but we just cannot tell you what it is. I was like, no, you don't. If you have evidence, you tell it to me and I'll repudiate it, just like I've repudiated everything else.
So Shaughnessy,
the whole thing dynamic changes, and Brian Shaughnessy steps in, and Brian Shaughnessy and this great lady named Kelly O'Mara, you are called in, and we fast forward a year. We finally get a hearing on the merits of my case, and I want all of your audience to know that it was you who came in and verified that you had known my defense intelligence handler for 25 years, and we'd all been part of this Thursday night at the Hunan, and so you knew me, and you knew that Paul was doing intelligence work. You knew some of the other people who had done intelligence work with, involving Libya, and that mostly involving Libya, and it was because of your testimony that they were finally forced to drop the charges. They waited until 5 days before President Obama's inauguration. And the whole thing, my nightmare lasted a total of 5 years, but it was because of you and your integrity and honesty. Yes, integrity and honesty.
I was glad to, honestly, looking back at it, I remember it well because your attorney did ask me to testify on your behalf. And frankly, I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole. I just didn't. I kind of felt like, Michael Corleone, just when you're out, they drag you back in. So, so anyway, I knew it was the right thing to do, despite not wanting to do it. I did it because a lot was being said about you that was a lie, frankly, and I knew it. Okay.
Yeah.
And
they were desperately making, they'd make up one story, it would fall apart. They make up another story, fall apart. At one point they said I was a religious maniac.
Well, what they also did is, Susan, is your Paul Hoven, who we're talking about, your DIA handler. You and I both knew Paul many years, 2 decades, more than 2 decades.
Yes.
And the fact that Paul lied to the FBI, okay, in your case about me, saying we were acquaintances, okay. So I have photographs of Paul at holiday meals at my family's house. We went to mass every Friday at 5 o'clock. We were both Catholic, and so that kind of blew their case as far as Paul being an honest guy. And I knew that Paul and you often spoke at the Hunan, because Paul told me everything about you, which, as I told you in court that day, I wasn't interested. Even though Paul constantly talked about you.
Constantly talked about me. You're like, oh my God, more Susan stories. Yeah.
Exactly. So anyway, I was happy to step in and testify in your case. And
it was a scary case. And I got to tell you that you were there a lot of people who knew I was telling the truth were too afraid of the consequences because it was so dire. It was so, it was like, if you tell the truth about her, that's treason. If you expose that we're lying about her, that's a treasonous act, and I had not done anything wrong.
Right.
I mean, the whole story was a lie.
Well, remember, Paul Hovan called me once after the FBI had interviewed him about you. And I thought it was odd because Paul had already moved from Washington back to Minnesota.
Richard
And
Hughes paid for Paul's, my CIA handler. Now, I have to tell you, my CIA handler diverted $13 million from emergency appropriations for the 9/11 investigation to build himself a mansion on Langley Lane in Langley, Virginia. This triggers a whole bunch of events, stealing from that 9/11 investigation. Richard paid for Paul to have a heart transplant at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota as a way to shut him up and buy his silence on my case. And so Paul suffered from chronic heart disease and a heart virus that had wiped out like 40% of his heart. And he needed that heart transplant to live. And that was the condition that was made, that he had to stay silent on me. He could not tell anyone anything, and then he could have his heart transplant.
well, look, the bottom line here, Susan, is I remember when Paul called me, he said, oh, they were just asking me about Snowflake, because that's what he called you.
That was yeah.
And I said, well, what did you say? And he said, well, I told her she was effing crazy. And I said, Paul, Susan's not crazy. I said, you know that. And he goes, no, she's crazy. I said, Paul, you've never said that in all the years I've known you, And he didn't like that. And I really felt like I was being taped. Honest to God, I did. I felt like I was being taped. But I wasn't going to back down. I thought, Paul, you're lying.
Yeah.
And so basically, he hung up on me. And that was the last time Paul and I ever spoke. But I remember that call very well because he never said you were crazy. In all the years that he was telling me all of your exploits, he never said you were crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm not.
Exactly. So
anyway, when I got to Carswell, the first thing they said to me is, well, the report about you, we can already see this is a big lie. Because if this was true, if the psychiatric evaluation that we're looking at was true, you would not be capable of having any conversation with anybody anywhere. And they said, we can already see that they've totally invented this story.
Well, I think it was fairly clear during your trial that I testified in that one of the main people that the government was depending on was an out and out liar, and they didn't want me to have to bring in all the photographs I had of Paul, and that we were very good friends over a 25-year period. But anyway, so, Susan, you did survive unbelievably.
Well, but you know what? But the integrity for all of your audience, your integrity at that critical moment saved my life. I mean, in my first interview with you, I'd like, yay, Kelly. But it's because of the depth of what I owe you as a human being, and my gratitude there's no way that I could ever articulate the significance of what you did.
Well, that's very kind of you to say that, Susan.
Being the one person who says, no, I'm not going to let you I will not stand by while you invent these lies and railroad this woman, scapegoating me, gaslighting me. It was a crime against history. And I will tell you, it was terrifying. Afterwards, I suffered post-traumatic stress.
Oh, I'm sure it still is in how could it not be? It basically kind of ruined your life.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. That's my question. Would you do it? This is my final question. If you knew today, what you knew, if you knew then what you know now, would you have still done the asset thing?
It's a good thing I did not know, because at the time that I did it, I made a conscious choice in my life that I was active. I'm not a victim. I make a really lousy victim. I will fight to the death. Paul Hovan used to say that Susan, if I was taking gunfire in a back alley at midnight, I would want you by my side because you would fight to the death. And that is true. I am ashamed of Andy Card. I despise Colin Powell. I despise the cowardice and the liars of people who, like Ron Wyden, who desperately wanted to go on television and pretend that he was getting to the bottom of Iraqi pre-war intelligence. And all of Washington, the left, right, progressive, conservatives, everybody wanted to blame the intelligence community for that war. And it was totally unjustified. If they'd actually listened to me, I would have stopped the thing. Just put my, I would have easily stopped the thing. I gave them an escape route. And that's why I went to Colin Powell and I said, look, this comprehensive peace framework could be implemented today, and you can turn around and tell the whole world that you, Colin Powell, forced the Iraqis to back down, and you can take credit for all these things. And we'll just stand back and let you be the one who says you negotiated it. I will, the State Department did it, and I'll shut up. I'll let you have this victory. And you
do it again.
Save the world from this hideous war. Would I do it again? I did what I had to do. I believed it was the right thing to do, and I was right.
Do it again.
I would have to do it again. I would have to do it again. God help me. I would have to do it again. It's like right now, Kelly, I have the 2 point. I am safeguarding the 2. I actually have had this
We're
conversation.
not going to go there.
Yeah.
We're not going there on this one.
Yeah.
We're not.
We're not. Yeah. But,
Anyway, I want to thank you.
But I would do it. I would have to do it again. My integrity. I did what I believed was right, and it was what happened was a crime against history. And it was a crime where I'm the central player. And I've had so many people who insulted me saying, oh, you think you're too important? You think you did that? It's like, well, yes, I did. Yes, well, I did.
It's definitely down in the books for historical purposes. Okay. It's like I used to say, if you write something when you're a journalist, you're forever in Google jail. You're just there forever. So you're sort of there forever. You're in Google jail. Okay.
Yeah.
And I am thankful that you did what you did. I'm sorry that it turned out the way it did. And I'm sorry that we don't have more honor and integrity within our intelligence and political circles. They let you sort of go down with the ship without any help. They didn't even throw you a life vest. So for that, they need to be ashamed of themselves. But anyway, what I want to tell my listeners is that Susan's got a book.
Extreme Prejudice, the terrifying story of the Patriot Act and the cover-ups of 9/11 in Iraq.
And you can get that on Amazon. And I really suggest that you do. I've read it. And it's unbelievable amount of information that you will not have known until you read this book.
Yeah. And that's a shame, because the media, the corporate media, should be covering stories like mine, and then we could avoid wars.
Yeah.
We could really avoid these wars, and we could turn this whole situation around.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Susan. I appreciate you being on. And for my viewers, I hope that if you like this show, that you'll hit subscribe, and we'll be back again next week. So take care, Susan.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.